Anybody want to guess what I'm playing around with here? Some of you may know, but I bet a lot of you don't. This is Mercedes' very first single arm wiper mechanism. And notice it only has one pivot point to one wiper arm, but look at this, it's got a little teeny wiper arm underneath here. So that, as it went across the windshield, it was wiping the lower part of this windshield with this little wiper arm here. This came out in the 1983 Euro 190E or 201 chassis, and then in the United States in 1984. So this was Mercedes' first attempt at coming up with a single wiper blade operating from the center of the car. I think it kind of worked okay, but this little wiper arm was kind of, you know, little funky and didn't work that great. So I think the engineers went to work, and by 1986, in the 124 chassis and also in the 201 chassis, they came out with the first articulating arm mechanism. And this is quite a piece of engineering. I remember the first time I saw one of these, I looked at that thing and I'm watching and I think, man, that thing looks really uncoordinated, because it was going across the windshield and going up and down. I thought, what kind of a gizmo is that anyway? And it wasn't until years later, when I actually got into Mercedes Benz, that I became kind of fascinated by the engineering of this mono wiper mechanism. This one here is removed from a 124 chassis, and notice it's considerably different from those early 201 mechanisms. It's quite complex, and you know, they work pretty well. And in fact, I think it's kind of amazing how well they actually work, considering these cars are over 20 years old. But they are starting to have problems, and they're starting to fail. And guess why? Here we go again. Yep, it's lack of lubrication. So in this video, I'm going to share with you some of the problems I'm seeing with these mono wiper mechanisms and what you can do to prevent the same problems on your car. There are differences between the 124 and the 201 chassis mechanism. Most of them are external. They're you know, different brackets that have to bolt into the different chassis. The motors, of course, are located at different positions and different angles. But the basic unit, the center articulating hub, is the same on both chassis. Now I'm going to show you one that's already taken apart so that you can kind of see how it works. Notice in here there is a half moon, you could call it, set of fiber teeth. And those fiber teeth are what move another gear on the center hub. If you look in here, and I try to scrape out this grease here, this grease is literally like tar. Look at that. There's no lubrication at all in this section, and this is one of the problems I was talking about earlier. When that grease dries out, becomes hard, it's going to cause excessive wear and failure of these fiber teeth. Now the hub has a center shaft on it that comes through and hooks to the lever that goes to the motor. And this gear here, which can either be a nylon gear or a steel gear, fits down into that center section, and as the motor drives the shaft back and forth, this gear moves in those fiber gears. And look at the arm. Could you see the arm moving in and out as I move this nylon gear here? So inside this articulating hub is another mechanism that needs lubrication. Let me show you this other one here that I removed from a different car, and notice when I try to move this that it's bound up. And what happened on this one is this, whatever happened in here, bound this tooth up, and it literally stripped out these fiber gears, and then the wipers just stopped working. So I'm going to go off to the bench now. We're going to take this articulating hub apart and try to find out why it was binding, and then we come back and talk a little bit more about the specifics of how to lubricate this unit. We've had a number of customers write and say, how can I lubricate the inside of this without taking it all apart? Well, I'm sorry, you can't. I do recommend anytime you replace the wiper arm that you lubricate the shaft, but that's not going to get inside and lubricate these other key components. There are actually 2 hidden screws that are inside the hub, so you cannot get to those without taking everything apart. I know it's a pain, but the alternative isn't that pretty either. So once you remove these screws here, you can separate this cover plate and then look inside here. You can see the mechanism. Now I'm going to turn this, and it's doing okay here, but right when I get up to the top, it's starting to bind in there a little bit. Take a look at the grease here. Does that look like grease to you? No, it's something else. You know, probably 20 years old. And along here on these sliders, this is plastic and this is stainless steel. I can see considerable wear here, right in this area right there. You can see that it looks like it's been kind of binding in that area. So internally, you have these slides to lubricate, you have the shaft to lubricate, you have a pivot pin here, and you also have another pivot pin, you know, right down in here that should be lubricated. And the only way to do this is to take this assembly all apart and remove that cover. You know, I wish there were an easier way. You know, I can feel your pain. I have a 190E that I need to do this to, so I have to go through the same thing. You know, 3 weeks ago I was thinking, maybe I could get in here and add some Zerk grease fittings to this. You know, I could put a grease fitting right in here, and I could come into this articulating hub, maybe come off to the side here and put a little grease fitting so I could get a grease gun and pump this thing up with grease. Now that would save a lot of time, but it doesn't solve one big problem. I hope you see that the problem is not just getting new grease in there, it's getting the old grease out. When you looked at some of the grease I showed you earlier in this video, you know, you could fill this thing up with grease, but that's not going to help. You need to get in here and completely, and I mean completely, clean out this old crud, get it totally clean, and then I recommend that you add synthetic grease. Synthetic grease does not get old and hard with age. And I know you're thinking, well, yeah, come on, let's do it. Let's do those Zerk fittings. Well, if you do this right with synthetic grease, it's probably good for another 15 years. It's not something that you have to grease on a regular basis. But it's very important that you completely disassemble it, and the only way to do that is to remove this unit from the car. If you don't know how to do that, I do have a manual on you know, removing your heater blower motor, which covers getting this out of the car. But once it's out of the car, you'll have to remove this nut, you know, and remove this section from this section, clean and grease this fiber gear area, and then, you know, these 2 hidden screws here, you'll have to remove those to get the cover plate off to actually lubricate the articulating arm assembly inside here. Now, once you do that, when I say synthetic grease, don't use it sparingly. You know, glob it in there, kind of like you do wheel bearings, because you want that to be a lubricant for the next 10 to 15 years, and you won't have to worry about it again. But warning is, if you don't do this now, and I'm sure very few cars have had this done, unless you have records that this has been done in the last 5 to 10 years, you better do it, or you will have wiper problems down the road.